Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Injury Law Pod. I am your host, Eric Bartlett, 29-year personal injury lawyer, and this is the podcast where we talk about all things personal injury law related. And up today, straight out of the headlines, we have got former Michigan head coach Sharon Moore being fired and facing legal trouble after an internal investigation and arrest stemming from alleged misconduct. And for those of you who may not necessarily follow sports news, this is a pretty big deal. And today we're going to see how defamation, which is a tort, which is an injury of a different sort, ties into my world of personal injury law and how it intersects with this story coming out of Michigan. But for those of you who don't know, he was fired yesterday for cause, I use air quotes, following an investigation into inappropriate and his subsequent arrest. Now, in the NCAA coaching carousel, there's always coaches switching schools, there's high salaries involved, and there's a lot of public scrutiny on these coaches. And so what happens legally when a coach's reputation takes a hit? When is a coach's firing legally justified? And where could defamation and personal injury law intersect again with this story? Well, let's talk a little more background. The coaching carousel in college football involves massive contracts, buyouts, and legal obligations. These employment contracts usually have a clause allowing for a coach to be fired for cause, in quotes. And what does that mean? It usually means that the school can deny payout of a remaining salary if there was misconduct proven on the part of the coach. So in this particular story, why does this matter? Because Sharon Moore's contract, which was for $5.5 million a year, has now been voided due to him getting fired for cause. So when you look at these contracts, there's a difference between a breach of contract and, say, a no cause termination. And that can have financial and legal consequences for both parties. So it's really important when something like this happens that the basis for the firing is identified, and the school obviously has to make sure it has a solid foundation for doing what it does, because obviously the coach who stands to lose a lot, not only with that yearly salary, but the ramifications for that coach's reputation down the road. There's going to be obviously a coach that has an incentive to try and hold the school to the original contract. But we're going to look at, in part of this, how personal injury lawyers would get involved when contracts are breached or disputes arise. Now, when we talk about defamation, again, defamation, that is a tort. I've talked about this before, that a tort is not a breakfast item that you order. Tort is the legal word that encompasses personal injury type claims. And specifically with defamation, so it's a personal injury of sorts. It's a harm to somebody's reputation, to their character. And so obviously it's not a physical harm. It's more of a, again, reputational harm, but it can be a real harm. And there is a legal basis for making a claim if a person believes that they have been defamed by someone else. Of interest, athletes and coaches at this high level college sports arena, they're public figures. And again, their reputations matter both legally and economically. And so when things like this happen, there's a lot of eyes taking a look at what were the circumstances surrounding a firing, and then what is the fallout going to look like. But again, what we have to keep in mind is just from a foundational standpoint, defamation, the allegation will be that there were false statements made about a person that harmed that person's reputation. Now, with a public figure, there is a different standard. And that standard is you must prove actual malice, meaning the person allegedly making the false statements had actual knowledge of the falsity or a reckless disregard for knowing whether the statement was false or not. So there's a higher level that a public figure is going to have to approve in order to be successful in a defamation action. Now, in a climate where allegations fly fast on social media and in press reports, and again, if you've seen anything, if you've been on the internet beginning yesterday, this has already come across your radar some way, somehow. This is a pretty big story that's developing again in the college sports world. And it just shows you how quickly all of this can get out to the world. And so again, these allegations, things start coming out, and the question becomes, how does defamation law protect or fail to protect coaches in this instance? So just as a real world example, not in the sports arena, but in the political arena, Rudy Giuliani, the former mayor of New York City, obviously a very large political figure here in the last 6, 7, 8 years. A jury recently awarded $148 million in damages to Georgia election officials over Rudy Giuliani's 2020 vote statements. The jury in that case, where the Georgia workers sued him for making false statements about them, the jury in that case found that the statements were false and found that these Georgia election workers had been damaged to the tune of $148 million. So that just shows you how serious reputation damage litigation can be. And again, when there's either more people involved or there's more higher economic people involved, then the stakes are even higher still. Okay, so how does personal injury law matter in a situation like this? Again, many coach stories, I use air quotes, involve allegations of physical or emotional harm, assault claims, or unsafe work environments. And just like with this most recent story with Sharon Moore, it sounds like there's allegations of an inappropriate relationship he had with an assistant of his. And then, of course, there's been some other allegations coming out subsequent to that as well. If a coach is accused of assault, for example, as with Moore's arrest, how do personal injury claims differ from, say, the criminal charges or civil tort claims? A civil personal injury case focuses on compensation for harms, emotional distress, physical injury, those types of things. Obviously, criminal charges, that's where the police are involved, prosecutors are involved. Was a law broken? Again, there's two different avenues here in the legal system. And again, he may have some claim on the civil side for, again, some kind of defamation, depending on what the factual basis for all of this is. But in the meantime, it looks like he's in the criminal justice system right now because he was arrested, and he'll be dealing with that side of the legal system as well. Just as a hypothetical, if a staff member alleged physical or emotional harm in connection with a coach's conduct, what that looks like is, again, there's going to be an investigation, there's going to be allegations, and again, there could be criminal proceedings. But what if nothing comes of it, it's unfounded, then again, the coach is going to have an avenue to seek redress against whoever was making the allegations against the coach initially. And if a defamation lawyer gets involved, they're going to be looking at what were the statements made, what was the level of falseness about the statements, did the person making the statements have a reasonable basis for that, especially as I mentioned earlier, there's a higher standard if you're a public figure, and you're going to have to show that the people that made the statements, they knew that they were false, or there was reckless disregard to the truth of the statements. One of those two things are going to have to be shown. Now, what we can take out of this most recent situation is the school has been very careful to simply tell the public that he was fired for cause, and no further details are coming forth from the school itself. But again, it doesn't take long for internet sleuths to start putting pieces together and trying to figure out on their own what exactly the circumstances were around this firing. But again, with the way that universities and coaches, those entities that are involved, should manage these public communications to avoid defamation exposure, is essentially what I've seen so far, which is very little information other than making the announcement that the firing was for cause and leaving it there. Now, down the road, again, if for some reason nothing manifests out of this and nothing comes of it, and the coach can show that he didn't do anything wrong, the fact that the school went out, publicly said they fired him for cause, is that actionable? That's up to obviously a judge and a jury maybe someday down the road, because obviously just the implication of being fired for cause, that's going to do something to your reputation immediately. Now, again, maybe down the road, things don't pan out, but everybody starts jumping to conclusions immediately, and your reputation is taking a hit immediately. The question is going to be, was it founded in truth, or was it not founded in truth? Was it based on a falsehood? And again, time will obviously bear out with this Michigan coach's situation. So what really gets highlighted coming out of this story from Michigan is that coaches' careers can be derailed legally as quickly off the field as they can on the field. Obviously, coaches are under consistent or continuing pressure to perform, to get wins, to go to championships, whatever that looks like. But if there's things that are occurring outside the sports focus, and there's behavior there that is, again, alleged to be in violation of a contractual agreement that they have with the school that they work for, things like that, things can quickly go off track for those coaches. And defamation and personal injury law both have roles in high profile sports scandals. And again, it's going to be a matter of whether, the coach at some point is able to prove that all of this was based on an untruth, and maybe he has a claim against the school somewhere down the road. Only time will tell that. But contracts matter. These are, again, very high value contracts. And, the clauses that are put in there tied to misconduct are very specific, because, again, these universities, they want to be able to terminate a contract if a coach steps out of bounds, so to speak, and does something that is, again, considered misconduct. And at the same time, these coaches, they're getting paid a lot of money, and they want to make sure that the school isn't trying to use some other reason to end a contract without a real basis to doing that. So as you go away from this episode, things to think about, right? And maybe this will be on your TikTok feed or some other social media platform. But questions that this brings up are, do you think public figures like university coaches should have greater protections against defamatory reporting, or should they be treated like everyone else? That's a question, right, to ponder. And again, as we go forward and we see how this unfolds, it's going to be really interesting to see exactly what details come out, what exactly the misconduct was, why this coach got arrested shortly after his firing, and again, whether down the road he has any basis to bring some kind of claim against the university for basically terminating his contract, putting out a public statement that he's no longer employed by them. And again, now he's facing obviously a whole bunch of backlash and obviously will have a very hard time getting another job as an NCAA coach or anywhere else for that matter. So I hope you've enjoyed this episode. And as always, be safe and be well.